Good morning, class. So today we are going to start talking about the genetic basis of inheriting a trait. So we talked about mitosis and meiosis. And meiosis is basically the process in which the sex cells or gametes are produced. And we know that the purpose of producing sex cells is for the purpose of reproduction and the passing of genes from parents to offspring. So we're going to be now looking more into the area of genetics, whereby we're going to study how these genes are passed on from parents to children in humans. Okay, but we're also going to be talking about other organisms, including plants. And so basically, genetics is the study of heredity. It's basically the study of passing of characteristics and traits, either physical or behavioral, from parents to their offspring, and for any type of living organism, not just for humans. Modern genetics is a field of genetics, biology, which involves a combination of science and technology. And genetics, the study of genetics has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years, and obviously with the more advancement in technology, the application of these studies has allowed humans to basically do a lot of things, more very useful things. For example, we've been able to increase the production of crops, food crops. We've been able to increase the output of certain products like milk, dairy products, because we've genetically modified or genetically changed the composition of different living organisms, including cows and horses and pigs, corn, to produce a lot more. Okay, and so we're going to be talking about that in this lesson, and we're also going to be talking about, I'm going to introduce to you the basically the person who is considered the father of genetics, and his name is Gregor Mendel. Basically, he was a Austrian monk, and he made the first discoveries about how traits are passed from one generation to the next because of his study of a very basic pea plant. And these experiments were conducted by him in the 1860s, so a very long time ago. So we're going to talk about that as well. So first we need to discuss some terminology. That is, we're going to be learning a lot of different terminology with the genetics unit. And so the first term that we need to make sure that we understand is the term trait. So most of you know that a trait is a physical characteristic that is caused by your genetics. And here are some examples. So your eye color, your hair color, your ability to digest lactose. So basically, some of you are lactose intolerant, and you're not able to break down this, as you should know from the first unit that we did, this milk sugar. Lactose is a milk sugar. Certain mental disabilities, genetic disorders like Down syndrome, for example, or diseases. These are also examples of traits that are caused by genetics. In plants, flower color, seed color, stem length. Those are all examples of traits that are caused by genetics. Another term that we're going to be looking over and over again at is the term generation. So each of these is an example of a human generation. So great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, and children. So we've got 4 generations in this example. Offspring is a term that is used to describe, basically in humans, a parent's child. In other animals, and animals young, or in the case of plants, the next generation of plants, etc. So another term is selective breeding, the process by which humans are able to choose specific members of an organism's population to breed together in order to produce offspring with favorable characteristics. So humans have been basically doing this for hundreds of years. They will select certain individuals of a species, animals or plants, that have favorable characteristics. So things that are favorable or going to be more effective, and they will breed them together to produce offspring with more favorable characteristics or traits. So we've been doing this for many, many years with many different types of organisms. This is an example of one. Selective breeding for dogs. That's been happening for years and years and years, and it continues to happen. And basically, this is where dogs have become domesticated over the years as well. We have here 2 different types of dogs, so a Labrador Retriever and a poodle. Even though this doesn't look like a typical poodle, it's but it is a poodle, and these 2 dogs have very different characteristics. The Labrador Retrievers are known to be very gentle. They are very easy to train, and that's why they're amazing service dogs. Eventually, after training, they become great service dogs, very family-oriented, great companions, and they're trainable. Poodles are also very highly intelligent. They are not as friendly as a golden retriever, but they don't shed. As opposed to golden retrievers and golden doodles, they shed a lot. So they become very, they're a nuisance to many people, and or their shedding is a nuisance. And a lot of people get allergies or have allergies to the fur of dogs. So what humans have done, dog breeders, they've basically mixed these. They've selected them to breed and have produced another type of dog, another type of breed, which is known as a Labradoodle. So this is a hybrid. It's a mix of the 2. And a Labradoodle has amazing characteristics. It is a really very family-friendly, gentle dog, very loving, also very highly trainable, but it is intelligent because it gets that from the poodle. And it also, most of them are non-shedding. I mean, there's a degree of shedding, but most of them are, have been bred don't shed. Like I have a golden doodle at home. He's 5 years old, and he is a mix between a golden retriever and a poodle, and he doesn't shed at all. And he's a lovely, lovely dog, and I love him. So this is an example of selective breeding. More examples include corn, bananas, tomatoes, and you can see that over the years, this is more primitive. This is what they used to look like, but this is a more modern husk of corn. And over the years, they've been selectively bred to produce larger husks. Bananas, this used to be the seeds in more primitive bananas, like they were bigger, and the bananas had a lot more of them. And the seeds are much larger than the ones that we see, the tiny little black dots that we see in bananas now. And tomatoes, look at that. They look like this at once upon a time. So these changes, this as you have more tomato plants with favorable fruit, for example, when you breed them together or selectively fertilize them, you produce more and more plants with the kind of tomatoes that you want to consume. So over thousands of years, you have this ability to produce a more favorable crop, a more favorable corn husk or banana or tomato plant. So humans have used selective breeding for thousands of years. More selective breeding involved in food production. So again, in corn, they were bred, you breed large husks with other large husks, plants with large husks with other plants with large husks, the more corn that there is available to eat, which is better for human populations. Bananas, they bred less seedy bananas with other less seedy bananas, producing basically seedless bananas. And tomatoes, you breed tomato plants with a large fruit with other tomato plants with large fruit, the more tomatoes, or the larger tomatoes, therefore more tomato to eat for humans. Livestock as well, in the chicken industry, they've been bred to, or they've been crossed with, the largest chickens have been crossed with other healthiest, largest chickens, and you basically get more protein that way. You're able to increase the productivity that way. So even this has been happening for thousands of years. They know by doing this type of selective breeding, they were able to produce favorable animals and plants with characteristics that were more favorable to humans. They knew that this selective breeding worked, but they had no idea about how and why it worked. They didn't know about the genetics that is related to how the selective breeding actually works until this person came along, Gregor Mendel, and he basically, the father of genetics, figured it all out. So Gregor Mendel, as I mentioned before, he was an Austrian monk, and he was the first to basically do many different investigations. He recorded all of his results. That's another thing that he did, was because he did so much fertilization, self-fertilization and cross-fertilization, and he recorded all of his findings. He was the first scientist to basically figure out the genetics behind inheritance. And so he experimented with pea plants and to figure out how traits were passed from one generation to the next. And the reason why he chose pea plants was for several reasons, but one of the most important reasons was that they were able to self-fertilize or cross-pollinate. So self-fertilization means that the male gametes, so basically these anthers, right, produce the pollen, which are the male reproductive cells. When a pea plant is able to self-fertilize, the male gametes are crossed with the female reproductive cells in the ovaries, and so the anther makes contact with the stigma, and that allows for self-fertilization. pea plants can also cross-pollinate. So the male reproductive cells of one plant can be used to fertilize the female reproductive plant parts of another pea plant. So this was very useful for his studies of genetics. In addition to self-fertilization and cross-pollination, pea plants had several different traits that he could study, and he could repeat his investigations and experiments to show that the results were very viable. So pea plants, there's characteristics or traits include petal color, or flower color, seed shape, seed color, the type of seed, like wrinkled seeds or smooth seeds, and stem length was also another characteristic that you could easily observe and make measurements of. So there's many different characteristics that were easily observed and measured for his experiments. So first thing that Gregor Mendel did was that he created a control group. Basically, what this means that he basically produced a true breeding generation of plants. Okay, and true breeding allowed for a group of plants that were always, when they were self-fertilized, they consistently produced offsprings with only one particular form of a trait. Okay, so for when purple flowered plants were self-fertilized over and over again, all of the offspring had purple flowers, and this is considered true breeding. So, and when white flowered plants were self-fertilized, all of the offspring had only white flowers show up in the next generation. Okay, and this was expected. So this was the control group. The first thing that he did was produce self-fertilized, or true breeding plants. Second thing he did was he introduced crossbreeding. So with those true breeding plants that only produced white flowers or only produced purple flowers, he allowed them to mix. He allowed them to cross fertilize and introduce this whole idea of crossbreeding. So he crossed the white flowered plants with the true breeding purple flower plants. And what colors do you think the next generation included? If you had white flowered plants crossed with purple flower plants, what were the expectations? So do you think that they would all be flat white or all be purple? Or were the next generation flowers solid had a solid color of light but lighter purple, like maybe even a pink, a mix between purple and white? Or did all the flowers have a mixture of white and purple splotches? So these were the many different hypotheses of Gregor Mendel and other scientists that did similar studies. What he found when he did this mixing of white flowers with purple flowers, that the first generation, all the offspring were purple. What happened to that white flower then? What he did to continue his investigation was that he allowed this first generation offspring, so all these offspring plants that were purple, he allowed them to breed with each other, so purple and purple. And he found that eventually in that offspring, the white flower actually came back. There were purple flowers, but then in that second generation of offspring, the white flower also came back. So purple and white flowers. Oops. Sorry about that. just going to skip on to the last slide here. And so this was the first part of Gregor Mendel's experiment. And next class, we are going to talk about what his results meant. Okay, what significant findings did he make with his experiments on these pea plants? This finding of the second generation of offspring having the white flowers show up is very significant, and we're going to talk about that the next class. So I'm going to include some reading, just 2 pages of your textbook with this lesson and some questions, and there's some terminology that I would like you to review and make sure that you understand before the next lesson that I post. Okay, have a great day, guys.